Alright, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and get back to the wonderfully weird world of H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome back. This is our second night of Lovecraft short stories. We'd intended to get through a few of these so that we could, cut back on my backlog a little bit. My e-reader program has got a limit of 20 books at any given time in the library, so I have to regularly cycle through them and remove them. And unfortunately, fortunately, a little bit of both, Lovecraft took up most of that queue with the myriad of short stories. So we've got a lot to get through, and we're chipping away at it every once in a while, whenever we have a free moment between other projects. So, we left off yesterday, getting about 2/3 of the way through the gates of the Silver Key. And, wow, that one is mind-melting, twisty, and kind of wild, honestly. The idea of extra-dimensional entities and existences being slices, or the current dimension being a slice from a higher dimension, it kind of makes sense, honestly. And the archetypal aspect being higher and higher and being so many different forms just based on the angle of the slice is intriguing. So, let's jump back in, because we left off with things not nearly with any sort of real resolution. There was the stranding of Randolph out on the other world, other time, halfway across the galaxy or across the universe, as a wizard warlock of another species. And he's found his way back, but still in the other form. So we'll have to see what happens next. Whether Randolph is able to reclaim the parchment that has his symbols that lead him back to his proper slice for this aspect, or whether he'll be having some other things go awry. I have a theory that we probably have already seen him. I think Randolph might be the Swami that's been retelling this tale, but we'll see if that comes to fruition. So, let's go ahead and jump back into it. We've got a little bit left, about 5 pages or so, but this is pretty dense stuff, so this may take us a little while to churn through. So, we're jumping back in to Chapter 7 of Through the Gates of the Silver Key by H.P. Lovecraft. In that bizarre room in New Orleans, from which the old black servant had instinctively fled, the odd voice of Swami Chandragupta grew hoarser still. "Gentlemen," he continued, "I will not ask you to believe these things until I have shown you special proof. Accept it, then, as a myth. When I tell you of the thousands of light years, thousands of years of time, and uncounted billions of miles that Randolph Carter hurtled through space as a nameless, alien entity in a thin envelope of electron-activated metal. He timed his period of suspended animation with utmost care, planning to have it end only a few years before the time of landing on the Earth in or near 1928. He will never forget that awakening. Remember, gentlemen, that before that eon-long sleep he had lived consciously for thousands of terrestrial years amidst the alien and horrible wonders of Yadith. There was a hideous gnawing of cold, a cessation of menacing dreams, and a glance through the eye plates of the envelope. Stars, clusters, nebulae on every hand, and, at last, their outlines bore some kinship to the constellations of Earth that he knew. Some day, his descent into the solar system may be told. He saw Cynarth and Yuggoth on the rim, passed close to Neptune, and glimpsed the hellish white fungi that spotted. Learned an untellable secret from the close-glimpsed mists of Jupiter, and saw the horror on one of the satellites, and gazed at the cyclopean ruins that sprawl over Mars's ruddy disk. When the Earth drew near, he saw it as a thin crescent, which swelled alarmingly in size. He slackened speed, though his sensations of homecoming made him wish to lose not a moment. I will not try to tell you of those sensations as I learned of them from Carter. Well, toward the last, Carter hovered about in the Earth's upper air, waiting till daylight came over the western hemisphere. He wanted to land where he had left, near the snake den, in the hills behind Arkham. If any of you have been away from home long, and I know one of you has, I leave it to you how the sight of New England's rolling hills and great elms and gnarled orchards and ancient stone walls must have affected him. He came down at dawn in the lower meadow of the old Carter place, and was thankful for the silence and solitude. It was autumn, as when he had left, and the smell of the hills was balm to his soul. He managed to drag the metal envelope up the slope of the timber lot into the snake den, though it would not go through the weed-choked fissure to the inner cave. It was there also that he covered his alien body with the human clothing and waxen mask which would be necessary. He kept the envelope here for over a year, till certain circumstances made a new hiding place necessary. He walked to Arkham, incidentally practicing the management of his body in human posture and against terrestrial gravity, and got his gold changed to money at a bank. He also made some inquiries, posing as a foreigner, ignorant of much English, and found that the year was 1930, only 2 years after the gold he had aimed at. Of course, his position was horrible, unable to assert his identity, forced to live on guard every moment, with certain difficulties regarding food, and with a need to conserve the alien drug which kept his Zakawa facet dormant. He felt that he must act quickly as possible, going to Boston and taking a room in the decaying West End, where he could live cheaply and inconspicuously. He at once established inquiries concerning Randolph Carter's estate and effects. It was then that he learned how anxious Mr. Aspinwall here was to have the estate divided, and how valiantly Mr. de Maringhi and Mr. Phillips strove to keep it intact. The Hindu bowed, though no expression crossed his dark, tranquil, and thickly bearded face. Indirectly, he continued, Carter secured a good copy of the missing parchment and began working on its deciphering. I am glad to say that I was able to help in all this, for he appealed to me quite early, and through me came in touch with the other mystics throughout the world. I went to live with him in Boston, a wretched place in Chambers Street. As for the parchment, I am pleased to help Mr. de Maringhi in his perplexity. To him, let me say that the language of those hieroglyphics is not Nakal, but Ralian, which has brought to earth by the spawn of Cthulhu countless ages ago. It is, of course, a translation. There was an Hyperborean original millions of years earlier in the primal tongue of Sothyo. There was more to discover than Carter had looked for, but at no time did he give up hope. Early this year he made great strides through a book he imported from Nepal, and there is no question but that he will win before long. Unfortunately, however, one handicap has developed: the exhaustion of the alien drug which keeps the Zakawa facet dormant. This is not, however, as great a calamity as was feared. Carter's personality is gaining in the body, and when Zakawa comes uppermost for shorter and shorter periods, and now only when evoked by some unusual excitement, he is generally too dazed to undo any of Carter's work. He cannot find the metal envelope that would take him back to Yadith, for although he almost did once, Carter hid it anew at a time when the Zakawa facet was wholly latent. All the harm he has done is to frighten a few people and create certain nightmare rumors among the Poles and Lithuanians of Boston's West End. So far, he has never injured the careful disguise prepared by the Carter facet, though he sometimes throws it off so that parts have to be replaced. I have seen what lies beneath, and it is not good to see. A month ago, Carter saw the advertisement of this meeting, and knew that he must act quickly to save his estate. He could not wait to decipher the parchment and resume his human form. Consequently, he deputed me to act for him. Gentlemen, I say to you that Randolph Carter is not dead, that he is temporarily in an anomalous condition, but that within 2 or 3 months at the outside, he will be able to appear in proper form and demand the custody of his estate. I am prepared to offer proof if necessary. Therefore, I beg that you will adjourn this meeting for an indefinite period. That brings us to the end of Chapter 7. There was a lot more actual spoken lines by a character than we've had so far. And also therein, my theory was shot to hell. So, we are back in the dark as to how things will play out. The Swami was a representative of Carter, not Carter himself. So, there goes that. It's a fool's errand to try and intuit the twists and turns that Lovecraft is going to give us anyway. Oh, and in the next chapter, someone else is talking. I need to remember what voice I used for this one. Okay. Chapter 8. De Marigny and Phillips stared at the Hindu as if hypnotized. While Aspinwall emitted a series of snorts and bellows. The old attorney's disgust had by now surged into open rage, and he pounded the table with an apoplectically veined fist. When he spoke, it was in a kind of bark. "How long is this tomfoolery to be borne? I've listened an hour to this madman, this faker, and now he has the damned effrontery to say Randolph Carter is alive! To ask us to postpone the settlement for no good reason. Why don't you throw the scoundrel out, de Marigny? Do you mean to make us all the butts of a charlatan or an idiot?" De Marigny quietly raised his hand and spoke softly. "Let us think slowly and clearly. This has been a very singular tale, and there are things in it which I, as a mystic not altogether ignorant, recognize as far from impossible. Furthermore, since 1930, I have received letters from the Swami which tally with his account." As he paused, old Mr. Phillips ventured a word. "Swami Chandragupta spoke of proofs. I, too, recognize that much that is significant in this story, and I have myself had many oddly corroborative letters from the Swami during the last 2 years, but some of these statements are very extreme. Is there not something tangible which can be shown?" At last, the impassive-faced Swami replied, slowly and hoarsely, and drawing an object from the pocket of his loose coat as he spoke. While none of you here has ever seen the silver key itself, Messieurs de Marigny and Phillips have seen photographs of it. Does this look familiar to you? He fumblingly laid on the table, with his large, white-mittened hand, a heavy key of tarnished silver, nearly 5 inches long, of unknown and utterly exotic workmanship, and covered from end to end with hieroglyphs of the most bizarre description. De Marigny and Phillips gasped. "That's it!" cried de Marigny. "The camera doesn't lie. I couldn't be mistaken." But Aspinwall had already launched a reply. "Fools! What does it prove? If that's really the key that belonged to my cousin, it's up to this foreigner, this damn Negro, to explain how he got it. Randolph Carter vanished with the key 4 years ago. How do we know he wasn't robbed and murdered? He was half crazy himself and in touch with still crazier people. Look here, you Negro. Where did you get that key? Did you kill Randolph Carter?" Okay, quick aside. That was 2 in quick succession. I thought we were done with this after we stopped with Mark Twain. After we finished Tom Sawyer, I thought I was safe. Not safe. Quick on the fly censorship strikes again. The Swami's features, abnormally placid, did not change, but the remote, irisless black eyes behind them blazed dangerously. He spoke with great difficulty. "Please control yourself, Mr. Aspinwall. There is another form of proof that I could give, but its effect upon everybody would not be pleasant. Let us be reasonable. Here are some papers, obviously written since 1930, and in the unmistakable style of Randolph Carter." He clumsily drew a long envelope from inside his loose coat and handed it to the sputtering attorney as de Marigny and Phillips watched with chaotic thoughts and a dawning feeling of supernal wonder. Of course, the handwriting is almost illegible, but remember that Randolph Carter now has no hands well adapted to forming human script. Aspinwall looked through the papers hurriedly, and was visibly perplexed, but he did not change his demeanor. The room was tense with excitement and nameless dread, and the alien rhythm of the coffin-shaped clock had an utterly diabolic sound to de Marigny and Phillips, though the lawyer seemed affected not at all. Aspinwall spoke again. "These look like clever forgeries. If they aren't, they may mean that Randolph Carter has been brought under the control of people with no good purpose. There's only one thing to do. Have this figure arrested. De Marigny, will you telephone for the police?" "Let us wait," answered the host. "I do not think this case calls for the police. I have a certain idea. Mr. Aspinwall, this gentleman is a mystic of real attainments. He says he is in the confidence of Randolph Carter. Will it satisfy you if he can answer certain questions which could be answered only by one in such confidence? I know Carter, and can ask such questions. Let me get a book, which I think will make a good test." He turned toward the door to the library, Phillips dazedly following in a kind of automatic way. Aspinwall remained where he was, studying closely the Hindu who confronted him, with abnormally impassive face. Suddenly, as Chandragupta clumsily restored the silver key to his pocket, the lawyer emitted a guttural shout. "Hey! By heaven, I've got it! This rascal is in disguise! I don't believe he's East Indian at all. That face, It isn't a face, but a mask! I guess his story put that into my head, but it's true. It never moves, and that turban and beard hide the edges. This fellow's a common crook. He isn't even a foreigner. I've been watching his language. He's a Yankee of some sort. Look at those mittens. He knows his fingerprints could be spotted. Damn you! I'll pull that thing off. Stop! The hoarse, oddly alien voice of the Swami held a tone beyond all mere earthly fright. I told you there was another form of proof which I could give if necessary. And I warned you not to provoke me to it. This red-faced old meddler is right. I'm not really an East Indian. This face is a mask, and what it covers is not human. You others have guessed. I felt that minutes ago. It wouldn't be pleasant if I took that mask off. Let it alone. Ernest, I may as well tell you that I am Randolph Carter. Okay, well, my original theory was right, but it was thrown off with a red herring. So be it. You got me this time, Lovecraft. You got me this time. No one moved. Aspinwall snorted and made vague motions. De Marigny and Phillips, across the room, watched the workings of the red face and studied the back of the turbaned figure that confronted him. The clock's abnormal ticking was hideous, and the tripod fumes and swaying auras danced a dance of death. The half-choking lawyer broke the silence. No, you don't, you crook! You can't scare me! You've reasons of your own for not wanting that mask off. Maybe we'd know who you are. Off with it! As he reached forward, the Swami seized his hand with one of his own clumsily mittened members, evoking a curious cry of mixed pain and surprise. De Marigny started toward the two, but paused, confused, as the pseudo-Hindu's shout of protest changed to a wholly inexplicable rattling and buzzing sound. Aspinwall's red face was furious. With his free hand, he made another lunge at his opponent's bushy beard. This time, he succeeded in getting a hold, and at his frantic tug, the whole waxen visage came loose from the turban and clung to the lawyer's apoplectic fist. As it did so, Aspinwall uttered a frightful gurgling cry, and Phillips and De Marigny saw his face convulsed with a wilder, deeper, and more hideous epilepsy of stark panic than ever they had seen on a human countenance before. The pseudo-Swami had, meanwhile, released his other hand, and was standing as if dazed, making buzzing noises of a most abnormal quality. Then the turbaned figure slumped oddly to a posture scarcely human, and began a curious, fascinated sort of shuffle toward the coffin-shaped clock that ticked out its cosmic and abnormal rhythm. His now uncovered face was turned away, and De Marigny and Phillips could not see what the lawyer's act had disclosed. Then their attention was turned to Aspinwall, who was sinking ponderously to the floor. The spell was broken, but when they reached the old man, he was dead. Turning quickly to the shuffling Swami's receding back, De Marigny saw one of the great white mittens drop listlessly off a dangling arm. The fumes of the olibanum were thick, and all that could be glimpsed of the revealed hand was something long and black. Before the Creole could reach the retreating figure, old Mr. Phillips laid a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Don't," he whispered. We don't know what we're up against. That other facet. You know, Zakalba, the wizard of Yarth." The turbaned figure had now reached the abnormal clock, and the watchers saw, through the dense fumes, a blurred black claw fumbling with the tall, hieroglyphed door. The fumbling made a queer clicking sound. Then, the figure entered the coffin-shaped case and pulled the door shut after it. De Marigny could no longer be restrained, but when he reached and opened the clock, it was empty. The abnormal ticking went on, beating out the dark cosmic rhythm which underlies all mystical gate openings. On the floor, the great white mitten and the dead man with a bearded mask clutched in his hand had nothing further to reveal. A year passed, and nothing had been heard of Randolph Carter. His estate is still unsettled. The Boston address, from which one Swami Chandragupta sent inquiries to various mystics in 1930, 31, and 32, was indeed tenanted by a strange Hindu, but he left shortly before the date of the New Orleans conference, and has never been seen since. He was said to be dark, expressionless, and bearded, and his landlord thinks the swarthy mask, which was duly exhibited, looks very much like him. He was never, however, suspected of any connection with the nightmare apparitions whispered of by local Slavs. The hills behind Arkham were searched for the metal envelope, but nothing of the sort was ever found. However, a clerk in Arkham's First National Bank does recall a queer turbaned man who cashed an odd bit of gold bullion in October 1930. De Marigny and Phillips scarcely know what to make of the business. After all, what was proved? There was a story. There was a key which might have been forged from one of the pictures Carter freely distributed in 1928. There were papers, all indecisive. There was a masked stranger. But who, now living, saw behind the mask? Amidst the strain and the molybdenum fumes, that act of vanishing in the clock might easily have been a dual hallucination. Hindus know much of hypnotism. Reason proclaims the Swami a criminal with designs on Randolph Carter's estate, but the autopsy said that Aspinwall had died of shock. Was it rage alone which caused it? And some things in that story. In a vast room, hung with strangely figured auras, and filled with aluminum fumes, Etienne Laurent de Marigny often sits listening with vague sensations to the abnormal rhythm of that hieroglyphed, coffin-shaped clock. And that is the end of Through the Gates of the Silver Key. So it seems that we did call it. The Swami was in fact Randolph Carter, but at the end, probably, as I'm guessing, the lawyer yanking off the mask startled him such that the Sakauba facet came to light, took control, and found his way to the light envelope that was disguised as a clock, and was away. So, oh, so close was he to being able to reclaim his human form. So close! But it was undone, with the Sakauba facet finding its way to something outside. Maybe. Probably. Possibly. Who knows? Alright, so that is the end of Through the Gates of the Silver Key. And as I was doing some research, and as Akimos was doing some research, we found that the Silver Key and Randolph Carter are rather popular characters in Lovecraft lore. Has come up rather frequently. Akimos had suggested that we read, I think it was The Statement of Randolph Carter. And unfortunately, I didn't actually have that one. And that one specifically is not on Gutenberg. It may either have an active copyright or was rolled into something else as a secondary. I've done some looking, and there is a collection of Lovecraft works that might contain it, maybe, but for now, I'm just instead we're going to follow this up with another Lovecraft work that is actually, I would be shocked if it wasn't directly linked. It is simply titled The Silver Key. So this was presumably an earlier work that is by Lovecraft as a solo work that was introducing the concept of the Silver Key, or if not introducing it, was centered upon the Silver Key. It is a short one. It's only about 9 pages long. Actually, shorter than that because we've got some entry points and exit point to it. So it should be a pretty quick read. It is pretty dense, but it should be pretty quick. And I think it is probably, almost certainly, going to be some reference, if not mainly following Randolph Carter before or during the events of Through the Gates. Actually, before we jump into it, I do want to see the publication date. So this one was first published in January 1929, it looks like. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Okay. The second author proposed it as a way to collaborate. That makes sense. And honestly, that one felt so very Lovecraft. It got a little bit more mind-twisty and cerebral than a lot of Lovecraft stuff usually gets. So that's probably where the influence of the second author came in. But the concepts and the original ideas and the tone were very Lovecraft. So that fits with sort of my conception of what we've read of Lovecraft so far. So, alright, great. So let's go ahead and we will jump into The Silver Key next. But let's go ahead and take an early break tonight. Oh, okay, that sent him a 6,000 word draft. He fiddled with it and added another 4,000. Okay. That explains why it's one of the longer of the short stories. But still a short story, nonetheless. And sort of adding some flowery language and some extra intrigue in the works, I'm sure. Wonder if he fleshed out some of the middle parts there. It's hard telling to know what the original draft would have been. But alright, let's go ahead and take an early break now. Stretch our legs before we settle in for the second short story of the night. This one I have full confidence that we'll be able to finish with the remaining time tonight, so we're not really in a rush at all. It's quite short. And it is on theme. So, two wins. So, alright, let's go ahead and take a few minutes, stretch our legs, top up our drinks, and get ready, because we'll be diving back into the Silver Key when we return. All right, we are back. Let me update our book listing here, because we are done with Through the Gates of the Silver Key. Recenter that a little bit. There we go. All right. So, while I'm thinking, I do want to see when the previous book was written. So, Silver Key itself was written in, looks like it was originally published in 1928 / January 29. So, the Through the Gates was published yep, that was 1933-34. So, there's a bit of a gap. So definitely the original, or not the original, but the inspiring work was the Silver Key itself. But, as we had mentioned, Randolph Carter is one of Lovecraft's favorite recurring characters. He uses him pretty regularly whenever he needs a Yankee mystic, which, you know, it works out pretty well. Except when he's stranded and launched into the cosmos. Sometimes things just work out that way. Unfortunate accidents, I suppose. Alright, so let us dive in now to the Silver Key. And it's actually one of the great things about Lovecraft is there isn't an actual proper reading order. You can jump into any of these stories and be completely independent of anything else. There's no continuity. There's no real threading and overarching story or anything like that. There are concepts that come up before and after and during and into other books and other stories. And the way they intertwine and interconnect is a lot of the fun. But there's no proper sequencing to it. The concepts that are brought to light that you don't know are part of the intrigue, part of the mystery. You may hear more about them in other works. You may have that connection and think, oh, I remember this. Or you may not. And you may never know. It may be a concept that is never expanded upon in other works. And that by itself is fantastical. All right. So, Yep. The format of having them in serialized and periodicals is difficult for having any sort of overarching continuity, which works out well. It's a lot like comic books, where there's some, like, there might be some things that are coming out in sequence, but especially the older ones, they're all pretty well standalone because the distribution wasn't there. You couldn't pull it up on the internet. You couldn't do anything of the sort. So you kind of, whenever you picked up an issue or a periodical, you got what you got. So it had to stand on its own legs without the benefit of preceding or following works. And yeah, now everything is crossovers and everything is too interconnected. We've lost that sense of independence of work. Even for things that are written now, like the modern novels themselves are having to be hyper-connected and converged and everything. It's unusual where you can find a single work that can truly stand on its own, that's not trying to start a series or anything of the sort. That's not to say that there aren't any, but it's just so easy to generate continuity now that it just goes into it, carries on. Build your own hype train. Alright, we're yapping too much. Let's go ahead and get back into the book, and we'll see what we have in store for us with the Silver Key. When Randolph Carter was 30, he lost the key to the Gate of Dreams. Prior to that time, he had made up for the prosiness of life by nightly excursions to strange and ancient cities beyond space, and lovely, unbelievable garden lands across ethereal seas. But as middle age hardened upon him, hey, 30, Lovecraft, calm down. Calm down. But as middle age hardened upon him, he felt these liberties slipping away, little by little, until at last he was cut off altogether. No more could his galleys sail up the river Ukranos, past the gilded spires of Thrawn, or his elephant caravans tramp through perfumed jungles in Cled, where forgotten palaces with veined ivory columns sleep lovely and unbroken under the moon. He had read too much of things as they are, and talked with too many people. Well-meaning philosophers had taught him to look into the logical relations of things, and analyze the processes which shaped his thoughts and fancies. Wonder had gone away, and he had forgotten that all life is only a set of pictures in the brain, among which there is no difference betwixt those born of real things, those born of inward dreamings, and no cause to value the one above the other. Custom had dinned into his ears a superstitious reverence for that which tangibly and physically exists, and had made him secretly ashamed to dwell in visions. Wise men told him his simple fancies were inane and childish, and he believed it because he could see that they might easily be so. What he failed to recall was that the deeds of reality are just as inane and childish, and even more absurd, because their actors persist in fancying them full of meaning and purpose, as the blind purpose grinds aimlessly on from nothing to something, back to nothing again, neither heeding nor knowing the wishes or existence of the minds that flicker for a second now and then in the darkness. They had chained him down to things that are, and had then explained the workings of those things till mystery had gone out of the world. When he complained and longed to escape into twilight realms where magic molded all the little vivid fragments and prized associations of his mind into vistas of breathless expectancy and unquenchable delight, they turned him instead toward the newfound prodigies of science, bidding him find wonder in the atom's vortex and mystery in the sky's dimensions. And when he had failed to find these boons in things whose laws are known and measurable, they told him he lacked imagination and was immature because he preferred dream illusions to the illusions of our physical creation. So, Carter had tried to do as others did, and pretended that the common events and emotions of earthly minds were more important than the fantasies of rare and delicate souls. He did not dissent when they told him that the animal pain of a stuck pig or a dyspeptic plowman in real life is a greater thing than the peerless beauty of Naroth with its 100 carven gates and domes of chalcedony, which he dimly remembered from his dreams, and under their guidance he cultivated a painstaking sense of pity and tragedy. Once in a while, though he could not help seeing how shallow, fickle, and meaningless all human aspirations are, and how emptily our real impulses contrast with those pompous ideals we profess to hold, then he would have recourse to the polite laughter they had taught him to use against the extravagance and artificiality of dreams. For he saw that the daily life of our world is every inch as extravagant and artificial, and far less worthy of respect, because of its poverty in beauty, and its silly reluctance to admit to its own lack of reason and purpose. In this way, he became a kind of humorist, for he did not see that Even humor is empty in a mindless universe, devoid of any true standard of consistency or inconsistency. In the first days of his bondage, he had turned to the gentle churchly faith endeared to him by the naive trust of his fathers. For thence stretched mystic avenues which seemed to promise escape from life. Only on closer view did he mark the starved fancy and beauty, the stale and prosy triteness, and the owlish gravity and grotesque claims of solid truth which reigned boresomely and overwhelmingly amongst most of its professors, or feel to the full the awkwardness with which it sought to keep alive as literal fact the outgrown fears and guesses of a primal race confronting the unknown. It wearied Carter to see how solemnly people tried to make earthly reality out of old myths, which every step of their boasted science confuted. And this misplaced seriousness killed the attachment he might have kept for the ancient creeds had they been content to offer the sonorous rites and emotional outlets in their true guise of ethereal fantasy. That's a interesting brand of atheism, agnosticism that Carter's got there. Very anti-established religion, but also wanting something beyond reality. It kind of makes sense. I imagine Lovecraft is mostly the same, of having not a whole lot of stock in established religion. It does come off as a little bit of, I'm 13 and this is deep sort of territory, though. But when he came to study those who had thrown off the old myths, he found them even more ugly than those who had not. They did not know that beauty lies in harmony, and that loveliness of life has no standard amidst an aimless cosmos save only its harmony with the dreams and the feelings, which have gone before and blindly molded our little spheres out of the rest of chaos. They did not see that good and evil and beauty and ugliness are only ornamental fruits of perspective, whose sole value lies in their linkage to what chance made our fathers think and feel, and whose fine details are different for every race and culture. Instead, they either denied these things altogether, or transferred them to the crude, vague instincts which they shared with the beasts and peasants, so that their lives were dragged malodorously out in pain, ugliness, and disproportion, yet filled with a ludicrous pride at having escaped from something no more unsound than that which still held them. They had traded the false gods of fear and blind piety for those of license and anarchy. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And even today, you see a lot of, in academic circles especially, there's a sort of disdain for fiction and fantasy, where it's not real literature, it's not real anything. It's make-believe and a waste of time. Poppycock. But it was definitely more rampant at the time. There's a little bit more of a general acceptance of fantasy, fiction, and just reading for the sake of it than there had been previously. You don't need to have a greater purpose. You don't need to be striving to improve all the time. Just enjoy the goddamn book. That's my feelings on it anyway. Carter did not taste deeply of these modern freedoms, for their cheapness and squalor sickened a spirit loving beauty alone, while his reason rebelled at the flimsy logic with which their champions tried to gild brute impulse with a sacredness stripped from the idols they had discarded. He saw that most of them, in common with their cast-off priestcraft, could not escape from the delusion that life has a meaning apart from that which men dream into it, and could not lay aside the crude notion of ethics and obligations beyond those of beauty, even when all nature shrieked of its unconsciousness and impersonal unmorality in the light of their scientific discoveries. Warped and bigoted with preconceived illusions of justice, freedom, and consistency, they cast off the old lore and the old ways with the old beliefs, nor ever stopped to think that that lore and those ways were the sole makers of their present thoughts and judgments, and the sole guides and standards in a meaningless universe without fixed aims or stable points of reference. Having lost these artificial settings, their lives grew void of direction and dramatic interests, till at length they strove to drown their ennui in bustle and pretended usefulness, noise and excitement, barbaric display and animal sensation. When these things palled, disappointed, or grew nauseous through revulsion, they cultivated irony and bitterness, and found fault with the social order. Never could they realize that their brute foundations were as shifting and contradictory as the gods of their elders, and that the satisfaction of one moment is the bane of the next. Calm, lasting beauty comes only in a dream, and this solace the world had thrown away, and in its worship of the real it threw away the secrets of childhood and innocence. So this first intro, or this first section, it is reminding me a lot of Thoreau. Lovecraft is getting awful goddamn preachy here. He's hammering his message home, beating that dead horse. So we'll see if he gets out of this rut and gets us back to what we're used to seeing. The weird and the wild, less than the preachy and boring. Amidst this chaos of hollowness and unrest, Carter tried to live as befitted a man of keen thought and good heritage. With his dreams fading under the ridicule of the age, he could not believe in anything. But the love of harmony kept him close to the ways of his race and station. He walked impassive through the cities of men, and sighed because no vista seemed fully real, because every flash of yellow sunlight on tall roofs and every glimpse of balustrated plazas in the first lamps of evening served only to remind him of dreams he had once known, and to make him homesick for ethereal lands he had no longer knew how to find. Travel was only a mockery, and even the Great War stirred him but little, though he served from the first in the Foreign Legion of France. For a while he sought friends, but soon grew wary of the crudeness of their emotions, and the sameness and earthiness of their visions. He felt vaguely glad that all his relatives were distant and out of touch with him, for they could not have understood his mental life. That is, none but his grandfather and great-uncle Christopher could. They were long dead. Yeah, this is slightly more interesting preaching, and it's a little bit more in line with some of my personal tastes, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still a sermon. Then he began once more the writing of books, which he had left off when dreams first failed him. But here, too, there was no satisfaction or fulfillment, for the touch of earth was upon his mind. He could not think of lovely things as he had done of yore. Ironic humor dragged down all the twilight minarets he reared, and the earthly fear of improbability blasted all the delicate and amazing flowers in his fairy gardens. The convention of assumed piety spilt mawkishness on his characters, while a myth of an important reality and significant human events and emotions debased all his high fantasy into thin-veiled allegory and cheap social satire. His new novels were successful as his old ones had never been, and because he knew how empty they must be to please an empty herd, he burned them and ceased his writing. They were very graceful novels, in which he urbanely laughed at the dreams he lightly sketched, but he saw that their sophistication had sapped all their life away. It was after this that he cultivated deliberate illusion and dabbled in the notions of the bizarre and the eccentric as an antidote for the commonplace. Most of these, however, soon showed their poverty and barrenness, and he saw that the popular doctrines of occultism are as dry and inflexible as those of science, yet without even the slender palliative of truth to redeem them. Gross stupidity, falsehood, and muddled thinking are not dream, and form no escape from life to a mind trained above their level. So Carter bought stranger books, and sought out deeper and more terrible men of fantastic erudition, delving into arcana of consciousness that few have trod, and learning things about the secret pits of life, legend, and immemorial antiquity, which disturbed him ever afterward. He decided to live on a rarer plane, and furnished his Boston home to suit his changing moods. One room for each, hung in appropriate colors, furnished with befitting books and objects, and provided with sources of the proper sensations of light, heat, sound, taste, and odor. Once, he heard of a man in the South who was shunned and feared for the blasphemous things he read in prehistoric books and clay tablets smuggled from India and Arabia. Him he visited, living with him and sharing his studies for 7 years, till horror overtook them one midnight in an unknown and archaic graveyard, and only one emerged where 2 had entered. Then he went back to Arkham, the terrible witch-haunted old town of his forefathers in New England, and had experiences in the dark, amidst the hoary willows and tottering gambrel roofs, which made him seal forever certain pages in the diary of a wild-minded ancestor. But these horrors took him only to the edge of reality, and were not the true dream country he had known in youth, so that at 50 he despaired of any rest or contentment in a world grown too busy for beauty and too shrewd for dream. Having perceived at last the hollowness and futility of real things, Carter spent his days in retirement and in wistful, disjointed memories of his dream-filled youth. He thought it rather silly that he bothered to keep on living at all, and he got from a South American acquaintance a very curious liquid to take him to oblivion without suffering. Inertia and a force of habit, however, caused him to defer action, and he lingered indecisively among thoughts of old times, taking down the strange hangings from his walls and refitting the house as it was in his early boyhood, purple panes, Victorian furniture, and all. With the passage of time, he became almost glad he had lingered, for his relics of youth and his cleavage from the world made life and sophistication seem very distant and unreal. So much so that a touch of magic and expectancy stole back into his nightly slumbers. For years those slumbers had known only such twisted reflections of everyday things as the commonest slumberers know. But now there returned a flicker of something stranger and wilder, something of vaguely awesome imminence, which took the form of tensely clear pictures from his childhood days, and made him think of little inconsequential things he had long forgotten. He would often awake calling for his mother and grandfather, both in their graves a quarter of a century. Then, one night, his father reminded him of the key. The gray old scholar, as vivid as in life, spoke long and earnestly of their ancient line, and of the strange visions of the delicate and sensitive men who composed it. He spoke of the flame-eyed crusader who learnt wild secrets of the Saracens that held him captive, and of the first Sir Randolph Carter who studied magic when Elizabeth was queen. He spoke, too, of that Edmund Carter who had just escaped hanging in the Salem witchcraft, and who had placed in an antique box a great silver key handed down from his ancestors. Before Carter awakened, the gentle visitant told him where to find that box. That carved oak box of archaic wonder, whose grotesque lid no hand had raised 2 centuries. In the dust and shadows of the great attic, he found it, remote and forgotten, at the back of a drawer in a tall chest. It was about a foot square, and its Gothic carvings were so fearful that he did not marvel no person since Edmund Carter had dared open it. It gave forth no noise when shaken, but was mystic, with the scent of unremembered spices. That it held the key was indeed only a dim legend, and Randolph Carter's father had never known such a box existed. It was bound in rusty iron, and no means was provided for working the formidable lock. Carter vaguely understood that he would find within it some key to the lost gate of dreams, but of where and how to use it his grandfather had told him nothing. An old servant forced the carven lid, shaking as he did so at the hideous faces leering from the blackened wood and at some unplaced familiarity. Inside, wrapped in a discolored parchment, was a huge key of tarnished silver, covered with cryptical arabesques. But of any legible explanation there was none. The parchment was voluminous, and held only the strange hieroglyphs of an unknown tongue written with an ancient reed. Carter recognized the characters as those he had seen on a certain papyrus scroll belonging to that terrible scholar of the South who had vanished one midnight in a nameless cemetery. The man had always shivered when he read this scroll, and Carter shivered now. But he cleaned the key and kept it by him nightly in its aromatic box of ancient oak. His dreams were, meanwhile, increasing in vividness, and though showing him none of the strange cities and incredible gardens of the old days, were assuming a definite cast whose purpose could not be mistaken. They were calling him back along the years, and with the mingled wills of all his fathers were pulling him toward some hidden and ancestral source. Then he knew he must go into the past and merge himself with old things, and day after day he thought of the hills to the north, where haunted Arkham and the rushing Miskatonic and the lonely rustic homestead of his people lay. In the brooding fire of autumn, Carter took the old, remembered way past graceful lines of rolling hill and stone-walled meadow, distant vale and hanging woodland, curving road and nestling farmstead, and the crystal windings of the Miskatonic, crossed here and there by rustic bridges of wood or stone. At one bend, he saw a group of giant elms, among which an ancestor had oddly vanished a century and a half before, and shuddered as the wind blew meaningly through them. Then there was the crumbling farmhouse of old Goody Fowler the witch, with its little evil windows and great roof sloping nearly to the ground on the north side. He speeded up his car as he passed it, and did not slacken till he had mounted the hill where his mother and her fathers before her were born, where the old white house still looked proudly across the road at the breathlessly lovely panorama of rocky slope and verdant valley, with the distant spires of Kingsport on the horizon and hints of the archaic, dream-laden sea in the farthest background. Then came the steeper slope that held the old Carter place he had not seen in over 40 years. Afternoon was far gone when he reached the foot, and at the bend halfway up he paused to scan the outspread countryside, golden and glorified in the slanting floods of magic poured out by a western sun. All the strangeness and expectancy of his recent dreams seemed present in this hushed and unearthly landscape, and he thought of the unknown solitudes of other planets, and his eyes traced out the velvet and the deserted lawns shining undulant between their tumbled walls, the clumps of fairy forest setting off far lines of purple hills beyond hills, and the spectral wooded valley dipping down in shadow to dank hollows where trickling waters crooned and gurgled among swollen and distorted roots. Something made him feel that motors did not belong in the realm he was seeking, so he left his car at the edge of the forest, and putting the great key in his coat pocket, walked on up the hill. The woods now engulfed him utterly, though he knew the house was on a high knoll that cleared the trees except to the north. He wondered how it would look, for it had been left vacant and untended through his neglect since the death of his strange great-uncle Christopher 30 years before. In his boyhood, he had reveled through long visits there, and had found weird marvels in the woods beyond the orchard. Shadows thickened around him, for the night was near. Once a gap in the trees opened up to the right, so that he saw off across leagues of twilight meadow and spied the old congregational steeple on Central Hill in Kingsport. Pink with the last flush of day, the panes of the little round windows blazing with reflected fire. Then, when he was in deep shadow again, he recalled with a start that the glimpse must have come from childish memory alone, since the old white church had long been torn down to make room for the Congregational Hospital. He had read of it with interest, for the paper had told about some strange burrows or passages found in the rocky hill beneath. Through his puzzlement, a voice piped, and he started again at its familiarity after long years. Old Benijah Corey had been his uncle Christopher's hired man, and was aged even in those far-off times of his boyhood visits. Now, he must be well over 100, but that piping voice could come from no one else. He could distinguish no words, yet the tone was haunting and unmistakable. To think that old Benijah should still be alive. Master Randy, whar be ye? Do you want to scare your Aunt Martha plumb to death? Ain't she told you to keep nigh the place in the afternoon and get back after dark? Randy! He's the beatin'est boy for running off in the woods I ever see. Half the time a settin' moonin' around that snake den in the upper timber. Hey, you! Randy! We're never safe from those accents. Never safe! They always are written out that way too. Not even exaggerating these. We'll never be free. Never, never, never. Thankfully, that one seems short. Randolph Carter stopped in the pitch darkness and rubbed his hand across his eyes. Something was queer. He had been somewhere he ought not to be. He strayed very far away to places where he had not belonged, and was now inexcusably late. He had not noticed the time on the Kingsport steeple, though he could easily have made it out with his pocket telescope, but he knew his lateness was something very strange and unprecedented. He was not sure he had his little telescope with him, and put his hand in his blouse pocket to see. No, it was not there, but there was the big silver key he had found in a box somewhere. Uncle Chris had told him something odd once about an old unopened box with a key in it, but Aunt Martha had stopped the story abruptly, saying it was no kind of thing to tell a child whose head was already too full of queer fancies. He tried to recall just where he had found the key, but something seemed very confused. He guessed it was in the attic at home in Boston, and dimly remembered bribing Parks with half his week's allowance to help him open the box and keep quiet about it. But when he remembered this, the face of Parks came up very strangely, as if the wrinkles of long years had fallen upon the brisk little Cockney. "Randy! Randy! Ha! Ha! Randy!" A swaying lantern came around the black bend, and old Benijah pounced on the silent and bewildered form of the pilgrim. "Darn ye, boy! So there ye be! Ain't you got a tongue in your head that you can't answer by? I've been calling this half hour, and ye must have heard me long ago. Don't ye know your Aunt Marthy's all a fidget over you being off arter dark? Wait till I tell your Uncle Chris when he gets in. Ye ought to know these woods ain't no fit place to be traipsing this hour. They's things abroad what durst do nobody no good. My grandson knowed to for me. Come, Mr. Randy, or Hannah won't keep supper no longer." Still not free. So Randolph Carter was marched up the road, where wandering stars glimmered through high autumn boughs, and dogs barked at the yellow light of small-paned windows shone out at the farther turn. And the Pleiades twinkled across the open knoll where a great gambrel roof stood black against the dim west. Aunt Martha was in the doorway, and did not scold too hard when Benijah showed the truant in. She knew Uncle Chris well enough to expect such things of the Carter blood. Randolph did not show his key, but ate his supper in silence, and protested only when bedtime came. He sometimes dreamed better when awake, and he wanted to use that key. In the morning, Randolph was up early, and would have run off to the upper timber lot if Uncle Chris had not caught him and forced him into his chair by the breakfast table. He looked impatiently around the low-pitched room with the rag carpet and exposed beams and corner posts, and smiled only when the orchard boughs scratched at the little leaded panes of the rear window. The trees and the hills were close to him, and formed the gates of that timeless realm, which was his true country. Then he was free. He felt in his blouse pocket for the key, and being reassured, skipped off across the orchard to the rise beyond, where the wooded hill climbed again to heights above even the treeless knoll. The floor of the forest was mossy and mysterious, and great lichened rocks rose vaguely here and there in the dim light like druid monoliths among the swollen and twisted trunks of a sacred grove. Once in his ascent, Randolph crossed a rushing stream whose falls, a little way off, sang runic incantations to the lurking fauns and agapans and dryads. Then he came to the strange cave in the forest slope, the dreaded snake den, which country folk shunned, and away from which Benijah had warned him again and again. It was deep, far deeper than anyone but Randolph suspected, for the boy had found a fissure in the farthermost black corner that led to a loftier grotto beyond, a haunting, sepulchral place whose granite walls held a curious illusion of conscious artifice. On this occasion, he crawled in as usual, lighting his way with matches filched from the sitting room match safe, and edging through the final crevice with an eagerness hard to explain even to himself. He could not tell why he approached the farther wall so confidently, or why he instinctively drew forth the great silver key as he did so, but on he went. And when he danced back to the house that night, he offered no excuses for his lateness, nor heeded in the least the reproofs he gained for ignoring the noontide dinner horn altogether. Now, it is agreed by all the distant relatives of Randolph Carter that something occurred to heighten his imagination in his 10th year. His cousin, Ernest B. Aspinwall, Esquire of Chicago, is fully 10 years his senior, and distinctly recalls a change in the boy after the autumn of 1883. Randolph had looked on scenes of fantasy that few others can ever have beheld, and stranger still were some of the qualities which he showed in relation to very mundane things. He seemed, in fine, to have picked up an odd gift of prophecy, and reacted unusually to things which, though at the time without meaning, were later found to justify the singular impressions. In subsequent decades, as new inventions, new names, and new events appeared one by one in the book of history, people would now and then recall wonderingly how Carter had years before let fall some careless word of undoubted connection with what was then far in the future. He did not himself understand these words or know why certain things made him feel certain emotions, but fancied that some unremembered dream must be responsible. It was as early as 1897 that he turned pale when some traveler mentioned the French town of Belloy-en-Santerre, and friends remembered it when he was almost mortally wounded there in 1916, while serving with the Foreign Legion in the Great War. Carter's relatives talk much of these things, because he has lately disappeared. His little old servant Parks, who for years bore patiently with his vagaries, last saw him on the morning he drove off alone in his car, with a key he had recently found. Parks had helped him get the key from the old box containing it, and had felt strangely affected by the grotesque carvings on the box, and by some other odd quality he could not name. When Carter left, he had said he was going to visit his old ancestral country around Arkham. Halfway up Elm Mountain, on the way to the ruins of the old Carter place, they found his motor set carefully by the roadside, and in it was a box of fragrant wood with carvings that frightened the countryman who stumbled on it. The box held only a queer parchment, whose characters no linguist or paleographer had been able to decipher or identify. Rain had long effaced any possible footprints, though Boston investigators had something to say about evidences of disturbance among the fallen timbers of the Carter place. It was, they averred, as though someone had groped about the ruins at no distant period. A common white handkerchief, found among the forest rocks on the hillside beyond, cannot be identified as belonging to the missing man. There is talk of apportioning Randolph Carter's estate among his heirs, but I shall stand firmly against this course, because I do not believe he is dead. There are twists of time and space, of vision and reality, which only a dreamer can divine. And from what I know of Carter, I think he has merely found a way to traverse these mazes. Whether or not he will ever come back, I cannot say. He wanted the land of dreams he had lost, and yearned for the days of his childhood. And he found a key, and I, somehow, believe he was able to use it to strange advantage. I shall ask him when I see him, for I expect to meet him shortly in a certain dream city we both used to haunt. It is rumored in Ulthar, beyond the river Sky, that a new king reigns on the opal throne of Ilikvad, that fabulous town of turrets atop the hollow cliffs of glass overlooking the twilight sea, wherein the bearded and finny Nori build their singular labyrinths. And I believe I know how to interpret this rumor. Certainly, I look forward impatiently to the sight of that great silver key. For in its cryptical arabesques there may stand symbolized all the aims and mysteries of a blindly impersonal cosmos. And that is the end of the Silver Key. It does blend in very nicely with Beyond the Silver Key. Obviously, it was intent. The latter was meant sort of as a second perspective / sequel / elaboration. So that makes perfect sense, but it was done very well. I think this may be one case where, well, no, I'll stand by previous statements. There's not a correct order to read these, because having read Through the Gates of the Silver Key first, it was exciting to feel and see the connections in this piece, the original piece. And if you went the other way, I think some of the mystique of connecting those dots would be lost. But it would also have a different sort of impact as well. Because since we read Through the Gates of the Silver Key first, we would have known that he connected his past and present and went that way. And the reveal of that in the Silver Key was sort of a dawning reflection, a dawning realization of what and how happened and what's going on. So I stand by, there's not a right order to read these. Either one could be done first, despite the fact that the one is definitely meant to be a sequel to the other. Yeah, it's very rare. Because usually, even things that are in like a periodical format, there's a right way. Like you try and follow chronologically or by publishing order or do what you can. But for Lovecraft specifically, you don't necessarily want to follow publishing order. And there's obviously no chronological order because he goes all over the place. So it's rare. It's a pleasant treat to be able to just pick up any which one you find on your shelf and be able to really enjoy it. I certainly do, at least. So it's nice. Now, I know there are other authors that have intentionally done so, where you can sort of pick and choose which ones to read in which order, and it will color your perception of the story. I know, I think a colleague of mine has read some sort of sci-fi that does that sort of thing. But that's intentional. It's meant to be sort of a choose your own adventure style, where you're reading entire novels in your own selection of pairings and orders. Whereas this is sort of a natural way it falls out. I don't think that Lovecraft really intended for things to not have an order. I think he just was writing things that came to his mind and linking things to things that he'd already written or had planned to write, or in some cases, I bet he was just writing things that may never have been intended to have connections, and then later on he may have linked them in. But it very well could have just been stream of consciousness, pen to paper sort of situation. And that's really cool. Alright, so that is the end of the Silver Key. Now the next question is there a exceedingly short one we could take? That, oh, is that Hulk? I thought I'd removed that. I guess I need to take that back out. Oh, okay, yeah, this is very short. We can get one more in us tonight. It's only a couple pages. Oh, never mind. It's got a bunch of chapters. Never mind. We're not reading that one. All right. Looking through. It's kind of dense. So the festival might be an option, but it is kind of dense. I don't know if we're going to be able to get through it that quickly. Haunter of the Dark. I don't think we read that yet. No. That's a longer one, so let's leave that alone. Oh, did you? Okay, great. Let me take a look. Okay, great. Oh, these are just like word counts. Which ones of these do we have? This is not that one. Interesting. So I'm seeing a lot of these are not in the Gutenberg collection. I think if we're going to properly explore the Lovecraft short stories, we may need to get a more broad collection. I did see another potential option that was a collection book, sort of an omnibus, that we may be able to dig into, but I think that'll have to be for another day. Yeah, I'm not seeing that we have any of these specifically. Interesting, though. Huh. I thought we'd have Nyarlathotep. But no. Let's see, so what do we have? We've got Medusa's Coil, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, The Festival, Haunter of the Dark, The Lurking Fear, The Quest of Iridon, The Shunned House, The Thing on the Doorstep, The Trap, and I think that's the end of the ones that we haven't read yet. So, I wonder if some of the short stories may not have been put into Gutenberg. That's a shame. Yeah, I'm definitely going to need to try and find that collection and see if there's anything of the like, because there are a lot of things that we are missing here that are a shame. Well, I think we should probably just be able to call it a relatively early night then. We've got through 2 of the short stories that are related to each other wonderfully. We've made a chunk in our backlog, and we have come to the end of Sunday, which means we'll be able to start a new book this coming Tuesday that can be something new, a little bit meatier, maybe get us through a lot of August, and then we've got so many options to pick and choose from down the way. So I'll be looking for the next day or two to see if we've got anything that strikes my fancy as being a new book, and or property or franchise or series or author in general, or if we want to revisit some things that we've done previously. I know last time we had talked about maybe The Wizard of Oz. I think we had talked about Faulkner. So we've got a few options that a few classics and really well-known names that we haven't read yet. So we've got, as always, by the nature of what we're doing here, we are spoiled for choice. We've got so many great options. So I'll need to think about it for a little bit. Probably come up with a decision by tomorrow or maybe Tuesday morning. I do need to give myself time to make a thumbnail. And then we'll see where we land. But I think this is a good place to wrap up for the evening. We've had fun with Lovecraft, as we always do. And so this is going to leave us with plenty of fuel for vivid dreams tonight as we contemplate the ponderous meanings of the Silver Key. Alright guys, if you have not yet, I encourage you to drop a like on the stream, maybe subscribe to the channel. It lets the algorithm know that we're doing fun things around here, and maybe introduce some new people to the books and chat that we have on the regular. And then, with that, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you, and good night.